Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is Great Big History. We continue our History 150 History of Leadership lectures with episode 15, Totalitarians and Dictators. So what's interesting is we're going to start with democracy. Democracy has a problem. It's slow. It has systems and parties and factions and fractions and arguments and debates. It has rules, and it's designed to be slow. It requires negotiations between groups, and no one gets 100% of what they want. Monarchy also has a problem. It has a built-in perpetual elite. The king's family has the power and the wealth. The nobility maintains their place as the king's homeboys, and that goes on for hundreds of years. Now, is there a tumult where underneath the surface some families are rising and some families are falling? Sure. But have you watched Game of Thrones? The same families are in charge for thousands of years. The families don't change. So that means that those who have ambition have limits on their power. We talked about it in our last episode, Littlefinger. Chaos is a ladder. Well, what had to happen to the monarchy? The king had to die. There had to be a revolution in the realm. There had to be revolts among the people, right? That caused chaos. So democracy is slow, and monarchy is faster, but the same people always have power. So if you're not part of that powerful elite, you get nothing. So dictatorship is a solution to a problem. It comes from Dictators. We have a German word, Diktat, a command. Dictatorship from the Romans is a temporary grant of absolute power to a leader to handle a crisis. It solves the problem of the democracy. It solves the problem of the republic, that it's too slow. It negotiates. Not everyone's on the same page. So what the republic would do is give absolute power. And it meant absolute. They could choose to do anything, murder everybody if they wanted to. But the goal was to save Rome, to save the state. And so it's a temporary grant. Now that's important, the temporary. Dictatorships are not supposed to go on forever. They're supposed to be temporary. You get a lot of power for a little amount of time because it's to solve a crisis. So there is a problem that needs immediate solution, or there will be dire consequences. The Gauls are invading Italy. The slaves are revolting against the state. The dictator must have all the power. They must be able to exercise that power. That's also important, because one of the problems with democracies is you say things and things don't happen. It's slow. There's committees. There's things to be negotiated in committees. Now, so they need to have all the power. They have to be able to exercise that power to get things done. People have to do what they command. So they have to be trusted with that power. And they are expected to return that power at the end of the emergency. So the qualities of a dictator is you don't have to be charismatic, but you do have to be decisive and not panic. You do have to make decisions. They have to also be the right decisions. You also need to be willing to, quote unquote, sacrifice the individual for the group. In Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, Spock sacrifices himself to save the Enterprise. And Kirk goes down. He's his best friend. He goes to see him, and Spock answers the why, the unsaid question, why? Why did you do it? And Spock says, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Now, can that lead to a lot of people dying? Well, if you have studied any of the 20th century, the answer to that is yes. Whether it's Pol Pot in Cambodia, Stalin in Ukraine, don't even get us started with the Nazis. The justification is we have to do this. We have to break these people, these groups, these interests in order for the group to survive, to flourish. The individual, now let's talk about definitions. The individual in this sentence is anyone standing in the way of the dictator's desires. The group is supposed to be the state, Rome, the republic, the enterprise. But the group could also be, and if you study the 20th century, you know this, whoever is the friends of the dictator. So they have to be decisive but not panic. They have to be willing to sacrifice individuals and interests for the sake of the group. They have to be able to push intransigent people out of the way. They have to be able to make good decisions and then follow through. Now, there is a discussion right now. There are a series of books that have come out in the spring of 2025 that argue that liberalism, progressivism, the Democratic Party need to change. And the way they need to change is to make the world more abundant, build more housing, build more railroads, get rid of all the things that are stopping things from being built. Wind farms from being built, solar panels from being installed. And a lot of that stuff is what we call NIMBYism. Not in my backyard. Yeah, a wind farm is good, but I don't want it in my neighborhood. Yes, high density housing would be great. More people should live near where they work. But if they build a 4-story apartment building near my house, my property value might go down. So I'm going to sue to stop them. And the argument of these, it goes back to our sacrifice of the individual. The argument of all of these books is that the Democrats mostly, but liberals in general, have given too much power to the individual. And what they have to do is push those individuals aside, that NIMBYism aside, and say, no, we are going to build what we need to build because it will help more people. We're going to build 4-story apartment buildings. We're going to build high-speed railroads. Is it going to go through a farm? Yes. Are we going to have to buy that farm and move that family away? Yes. We're going to have to build stuff. We're going to have to build wind farms. We're going to have to, and some people are going to get hurt by that. Now, the hope is we'll mitigate as much of that hurt as possible, but, I mean, we're not taking them out and shooting them the way the Nazis or the Stalinists did. But the idea of, if you want a world of abundance to produce more things, you're going to have to push those interests aside, those individuals aside. You have to not care what they want. But here's the thing. That only works if they make good decisions and then follow through on them. if that high-speed rail works and moves people from place to place at 300 miles an hour. If it improves, if the wind farm does give us cleaner energy, lowers our CO2, and gives and electrifies more homes. That if you're going to sacrifice the individual, it has to be good decisions for the group. And they have to be able to follow through. And we could go through that murdering 1/3 of Cambodians was a bad decision in Cambodia under Pol Pot. That the Holocaust is a terrible, horrible decision for Germany, much less for all of human history, but just for Germany. The same thing with Stalin and murdering the other members of the Communist Party or putting people in gulags. That these were bad decisions that hurt the society rather than helped it. So we also need people who are trustworthy with the power. So these are the qualities. They don't have to be charismatic, but they have to be decisive. They can't panic. They have to be willing to sacrifice the individual for the group. So you have to have, like Stalin called himself, he's the man of steel, right? Stalin means steel, right? They have to make good decisions, and then they have to follow through. They can't backtrack and go, well, I don't know. They're going to have to, they make a decision, they have to go through with it. And then they have to be trustworthy with the power by the people. So Washington, yes, trustworthy. Stalin, no. And you could see the differences in the state. Washington helped create a democratic republic. Stalin created a paranoid police state. So we see some examples. The most famous of all examples of a good dictator is Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus is kind of the model on Washington. There are 2 different statues that weigh like tons in the Smithsonian of Washington as Cincinnatus. And that was very much in the early republic, the way America saw Washington as this Roman who was given absolute power. And after he saved Rome from an invasion, he handed back his sword and went back to being a farmer. The sword into plowshares, that he didn't keep the power. He could have kept it for at least 6 months. He didn't even try. He solved the problem much earlier, handed back his sword, went home. That's Washington. Right? Could have been president for a 3rd term, didn't want to. Could have told Congress what to do. He had an army, didn't. We have Octavian, the first emperor. Now, he stays in power for life, but he's a good dictator for the most part. The problem is he didn't bring back the republic. And that would give us Tiberius and Caligula and Nero and these terrible leaders later on. But Octavian's goal was to rebuild Rome after 100 years, 125 years of civil war, of the elites murdering each other, of armies, of Roman armies butchering each other. His job was to bring peace, and he did. There's Thomas Cromwell. Maybe he's a dictator. I mean, there's Henry VIII. Who's technically he is the king, so he's technically above Thomas Cromwell. But Thomas Cromwell is bringing the Reformation to Britain, to England, whether it wants it or not. He's going to liquidate the monasteries. He's going to get Henry VIII divorced a couple times. I mean, there's not for nothing. There's a reason why the conservative faction, the Catholic faction, cut Thomas Cromwell's head off. So he's kind of in parentheses here because he's kind of like, is he a dictator? And is he good? I mean, he's good he brought the Reformation to England, but is he a good guy? I just watched Wolf Hall, so, maybe I'm biased after watching that. But then again, I'm Catholic, so, Thomas Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell. Okay, he's a terrible dictator if you're Irish or Scottish. That's certainly true. But he also has all of these qualities. Defeated the king, Charles I, then cut his head off after a trial, to be fair, after a trial. And the king didn't accept, kept trying to undo. There were plenty of chances for Charles I to kind of just give up and remain king and just be a different kind of king, a constitutional monarch maybe, and he didn't. And so, oops. But when Oliver Cromwell dies, the Republic dies with him. And in fact, there's this, you watch The Queen and or The Crown, I'm sorry, on Netflix, and they'll say 1,000 years of uninterrupted. It's like, it was interrupted for about 15 years. I mean, it was interrupted for Cromwell. There was a republic. There wasn't 1,000 years of uninterrupted kings in Britain. Nope. There's Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, who was in charge for 30 years. So now they're dictators. And remember, they were willing to sacrifice the individual, so not everybody's happy with them. But is Singapore a better place to live in now in the 2020s than it was in the 1960s? Undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. It's a first world nation. It's wealthy. It's safe. It's healthy. It wasn't any of those things in, say, 1945. The desires of the dictator. So we have the qualities. Now, what does a dictator want? If you have a dictator, what do they want? They want control. They want the ability to make decisions without having to negotiate. And few people ever have this ability. If you are a parent, you know this. You have to constantly negotiate. If you are married, you're constantly negotiating. You can't even go and have dinner without being like, well, what do you want? I don't know. What do you want? Right? If you've got kids, forget it. You're constantly like, can we take a bath now? Can we go out? Can we go, okay, which toys do you want? You're always negotiating. There's a scene in the end of the first season in an episode called Let Bartlett Be Bartlett in the West Wing. And the president is arguing with his chief of staff. And the chief of staff is, I'm waiting for you to make a decision. And the president goes, I have said it. And nothing ever happens. You're seeing that with President Trump remembering his first term. He said the same thing about when he was president in 2016, that he wanted to do things and the quota. Now, his conspiracy theory is the deep state stopped him. But the deep state was just all those institutions that are like, this is a bad idea. It was just democracy that stopped him. Because in a democracy, you're constantly negotiating. You can't command. You can't control. There's too many interest groups. But what a dictator wants is the ability to say, red is green, and red becomes green. And they want a power few people in their lives ever have. The second is they want prestige. They want everyone to love you. You're the savior of the country. You make the good decisions. Evita, look at that. Look at the poster. If you were watching the video, look at the poster. Evita, don't cry for me, Argentina. I'm Evita. Love me. from Triumph of the Will. Look at all those people who have come to salute, to parade for Hitler. That's what they want. They want the prestige. It is not a surprise that what does President Trump want this summer? He wants a parade on his birthday. He wants a military parade in Washington, D.C. for his birthday for him. It's the prestige. President Trump has told you that he likes the prestige. That's why he does the rallies. 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 people. That's why he bragged about the size of his inauguration in 2016. It was the biggest that ever was. It wasn't. But it didn't matter. It's the prestige. Everyone loves you. You want to be showered in that. You watched Elon Musk do that. He came out. He gave a speech at one of Trump's rallies. Suddenly 10,000 people cheered for him. And he hasn't gone away since. He wants the love. And when he's not getting it, he gets mad. Which means for the last 3 months, he's been fighting with people on Twitter. He's tweeting 300-400 times a day, fighting with people. They want the prestige. They want to be loved, that they are making the right decisions, that people agree with them. And heck, everybody wants that. I want that. I would love to walk into a classroom, deliver a lecture, and have everyone stand up and applaud and be like, "Oh, professor, that was amazing." That's why people become comics and musicians, and they want to be on stage to soak up that prestige, that love. They want change. They want change. They want to destroy their opposition. They want to change systems. They might want to benefit or create their own powerful allies. They were brought to power to change things. But then they're going to want to stop changing things. And we saw this a bit with the revolutions. Because once you've changed things, once you've done what you want, once you've put your friends in powerful places, once you've taken over the system, once you've done the changes that you dreamed about doing, now you don't want things to change. You want them to stay complete. Robespierre hit a place and said, "Great, the revolution is done." Well, the revolution kept going on without him. And when he tried to stop it, they cut his head off. Thus, the desire of a dictator for change, which is exactly what they are brought to power to do, is also in many ways their undoing. Unless you're a Cincinnatus, unless you're a Washington, who says, I am here for a very specific reason, and now I can leave. Now I can give up power. Because otherwise, you now have to break a lot of people and momentum and in institutions in order to stop change. Because you put it all in motion. And we know from our laws of momentum, right? Our Isaac Newton, right? An object in motion remains in motion. A project in change, a culture in change will continue to change until it's stopped by a force. Well, you have to break a lot of people to do that. And the fourth thing is wealth. The wealth of the nation becomes personal wealth. If you're watching the video, there's the image of the eagle's nest, which it's now a restaurant, actually, but it was a villa in the Bavarian mountains, in the Austrian Bavarian mountains, and it's beautiful. Absolutely. Look at that view. It is beautiful. Did Hitler own it? Nope. But when he became Chancellor of Germany, he took it over. It became his. And so one of the desires of a dictator is to gain the wealth you never had in any other way. Now, Cincinnatus was well off. Washington was well off. Octavian was the heir of Caesar. He was well off. So it's not always the need, and especially not the need of our successful dictators. But for Hitler, for Stalin, for Pol Pot, these are guys who once they took over and got rich, they never wanted to go back. They didn't want to not be rich. And so they plundered the nation for themselves. The nation's money became their money. Putin has done this. The wealth of Russia is now Putin's wealth. Okay, the problems for a dictator. Well, we've talked about one of them. And that's the change, right? So we'll talk about that now. There's a crisis that creates a dictator. There's an invasion. There's a apocalyptic natural disaster. There's something that has happened that needs a dictator. That the people say, we need one person to solve the problems. But once you solve the problems, you don't need a dictator. So for a dictator to stay in power, you always need a crisis, which leads to the exhaustion of the people. I mean, Hitler is a perfect example of this. Stalin is too. You know? So you have the Great Depression. That brings Hitler to power. He has the biggest party. He's got the biggest percentage in the parliament, in the Reichstag. And then there's the burning of the Reichstag, either by either a disturbed individual who got blamed on being a socialist, or it was a plant and the Nazis did it themselves. But it gave the justification for emergency powers for Hitler. Then there keeps needing to be an emergency for you to keep emergency powers. Like, he never gives up the emergency powers. Why? Because then it becomes, well, we have to solve the Great Depression. We have to solve the communist problem. We have to solve the Jewish problem. We have to solve the problem with unification of Austria. We have to solve the problem of unification with Czech Germans. We have to solve the problem with the Poles. We have to solve the problem. There's always a new problem that's generated. And then once World War II starts, well, that becomes a self-perpetuating. You have to keep fighting that war until you win it. And, well, they lost. So it's just and it's exhausted. The German people did not want to fight in 1946. They were done. They were done in 1945. It was over. There was no guerrilla war. It was over. It was done. The people were exhausted. And in fact, the German people were probably exhausted far earlier than that if they had actually had a choice. The cities were bombed. Everything was ruined. The country was broken up into pieces. A Soviet Russian army is owning half of the country. I mean, come on. Done. Absolutely done. If you've watched any of the movies about the death of Stalin, and there was one in the 90s that I remember as a comedy, and then there's the death of Stalin from like 2010, 2015, which is also kind of a comedy. It's more of a dramedy. The one that you'll see pop up in our images with Jason Isaacs as Zhukov. By 1953, people were exhausted by Stalin. They were exhausted by Stalin long before that. Yeah, was there a cult that loved Stalin? Yeah, but there was exhaustion. All of these gulags and the violence and what could you say? What couldn't you say? What could you do? What couldn't you do? There's exhaustion within the Communist Party of having to walk on the eggshells around Stalin. People don't want there to be a crisis all the time, but a dictator needs one constantly. So people have to constantly be in fear. The second thing is there's opposition. There are groups that don't want to do what the dictator wants to do. And so the dictator has to rely on violence or coercion or economic destruction. Stalin starves the Ukrainians. Hitler commits the Holocaust. He murders Jewish Germans. And in order to break the opposition, you create more enemies. You create more people who dislike what you're doing. Stalin and Hitler, Pol Pot, Mao are hated by most of the world today. And in fact, the people who love them are looked badly upon. Like, how could you like this guy? Do you know how terrible he was? And so it just creates, you have opposition. And you're always going to have opposition. Now, in a democracy, you have elections. You have negotiations. You have ways for the opposition to win and or lose. You have to make a better argument. You gain power not by destroying your opposition, but by proving you have better ideas than the opposition, by being more popular than the opposition. Not for a dictator. For a dictator, they see opposition and they have to obliterate it. They have to crush it, which creates more opposition. Third, loyalty. There's the problem of loyalty. You have to have loyalty. So the dictator controls power, patronage, and wealth. So they're able to reward friends. If you are a good friend of Putin, you've done well. But the dictator also keeps others from rising. Only their friends. So if they don't know you, if the dictator doesn't know you, you can't rise. There's a limit on how powerful you can get. And there's the Gestapo or the NKVD, the secret police, who are out there to stop you from rising. And remember the opposition. So there's always a problem of loyalty. Why are they my friends? Are they my friends because they're my friends? Or are they my friends because I pay them? Because I give them stuff? How loyal are they? How will they do what I ask? Will they do what I demand them to do? Is always a problem for a dictator. Always. That's the funny thing, is they want the control to do what they want to do. But there's always the problem of, can I really trust these people to do it? So you had the Gestapo investigating Christian Germans, Aryan Germans. Those are people who are supposed to be Nazis. But that's who the Gestapo is investigating. The Gestapo was investigating Nazis because they might not be totally loyal to the head of the Nazis. Does that make sense? But that's exactly what it was. The NKVD did the same thing to communists. And also, dictators usually need different groups to balance each other's opposition. So you have, like, how do I describe it? Let's use the U.S. government. Not to say our U.S. government is a dictatorship, but you have your cabinet members. You have the Secretary of State. You have state, right? The diplomats. They want something from you. They want power. They want to be in charge. Like we saw this in the Iraq War. Who was going to run the Iraq War? And there was a fight between the State Department and the Pentagon and the military. And the State Department said, we can solve this problem without having to conquer Iraq, without having to put 200,000 troops in it. We can use these different methods. And even if we do put troops into Iraq, if state runs it, we can make negotiations with local elites. We can create a new Iraqi government pretty quickly, things like that. Whereas the military said, we have to win the war against the Iraqi army. We have to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and then we have to be in charge. We have to be the police. We have to be in charge, right? And you have other groups, the CIA, the FBI, they're all playing for who gets to be the last to talk to the king, the last to be in the room where it happens. And Hitler did this continuously. Stalin did too, where you played the different groups off against each other. Because as long as they're competing against each other, they're not united against you. So again, loyalty is a problem if you're a dictator. What happens if the SS, the Gestapo, and the army all unite and think Hitler's bad at being leader, right? No more Hitler. So he needs the Gestapo, and he needs the SS, and he needs the army, and he needs the industrialists, and he needs these different groups, the trade unionists. They got rid of the trade unionists, so that's not a good thing. But the middle class manufacturing workers, right? To play, to all demand so that they come to Hitler, they come to the dictator and say, oh, help us, right? So there's always this factional conflict going on. And fourth, after loyalty comes talent. Like, how do you get good people to work for you if you only reward loyalty? Like, that's the problem, right? Who's speaking truth to power? Who's going to tell the dictator they're wrong? How do you get someone who says, no, that's a bad idea? Like, oh, we're going to put tariffs on the entire world. Someone needs to say, no, that's bad. That's going to destroy the stock market and or the bond market and make America poor again. Like, who's going to sign up for that? And who's going to be able to rise? Remember, the dictator keeps talent from rising because that talent, if it rises too much, could replace them. Look at Napoleon getting rid of the directorate, right? Getting rid of Robespierre and getting rid of, well, he doesn't directly get rid of Robespierre, but getting rid of Robespierre allowed others to rise, allowed for the rise of Napoleon. How about that? So you have a problem of talent because you still need good people to do good things. For you to be a successful dictator, remember, you can't do everything. You have to delegate. You have to say, you do this, you build a factory, you build an army, you build more tanks, and he needs it to get done. Because no one person can do it. Government is way too big. Government is way too complicated. So you constantly need a crisis. You're constantly fighting your opposition. Whether it's overt and institutional or just the groaning and the moaning of people who just don't, who are digging in their heels. They just don't want to do what you want them to do. There's the problem of loyalty. How do I know that they're truly on my side, that they're not going to work against me? But then there's also, how do I find the people who can do the job well and who are also loyal? So there's all these problems. So we see this very clearly in the representation of Hitler in the German movie called Downfall. And the famous scene that you can go and you can see is the speech to Steiner's attack, where Hitler is confronted with the fact he's going to lose. Berlin's done. Berlin is going to be taken by the Soviets. And the war is over. To lose Berlin it's over. And he says, that was an order. Steiner's attack was an order. And you didn't carry it out. Now, Steiner couldn't carry it out. He didn't have enough troops. He didn't have enough guns. He didn't have enough tanks. If he had carried it out, he would have lost. But what does Hitler say? I should have had all the generals. I should have shot all the generals like Stalin did. And then they wouldn't have had these thoughts. All the high-ranking officers executed as Stalin did. Then they wouldn't have these independent thoughts. The problem was they weren't loyal enough. They were thinking for themselves. So I didn't have control. Hitler in the bunker. I didn't go to fancy schools. I conquered Europe on my own. Now think about that. I conquered all of Europe on my own. The German army in 1945 had, during the Second World War, 13 million soldiers in it. They built 120,000 planes. They had a $350 billion economy. Now, the U.S. economy was $800 billion. So you could see the problem with starting a war with the United States when you have one-third the economy. But think about that. A $350 billion economy that you can rely upon. 13 million soldiers, 120,000 planes. Did you really conquer Europe on your own, all by yourself? That's the dictator, though. The dictator says, I am doing it. It's me. This kind of, that, what for Washington or Cincinnatus is, I'm important, but not more important than the state. For Hitler, it's the megalomania. I am more important than the state. And it's really easy. We see it all the time. Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot. There's a litany of dictators who say, only I can save the state. I am more important than the state. But they're not. They're just not. Again, Hitler in the bunker and Downfall. To not do what Hitler ordered was a betrayal to him. I've been betrayed and deceived from the start. But to betray him personally is a betrayal of the German people in general. Such an enormous betrayal of the German people. I come first. The dictator comes first. Then the people. Not, this is a betrayal of the German people. And also a betrayal of me as the leader of those people. No. It's a betrayal of me and thus the German people. How can I be a leader under these circumstances? He can't be a leader unless everyone does everything he wants, including suicidal attacks that will just kill more soldiers, that won't accomplish anything. How can I be a leader unless everyone does everything he wants? How can I be a leader under these circumstances? Where I don't have the complete and utter loyalty of everyone. The death of Stalin, the movie we talked about a little bit earlier, is a crisis of who leads after the death of a dictator. Dictators are surprisingly not very likely to prepare for their own deaths. Dictators have taken over so much personally, no one else knows how the system works or who is loyal to whom. Take a look at Walter White in Breaking Bad. Only Walter White knows all the relationships, all the different things, all the different connections. Even Jesse, his right-hand man, has their secrets kept from Jesse. That's part of their relationship that they always have a falling out over. No one else is so enmeshed because they have to become the indispensable person. Now, here's a little, if you're watching the video, there's all of the little guys who are all the different leaders of all the different groups. Stalin's behind them in a big portrait. And look, they're all looking at each other. They're all wondering who's going to kill who's going to murder who's going to make a play for the big chair. Dictatorships usually lead to more dictatorships as factions murder each other. They almost never lead to democracy. That a dictatorship ends and then a democracy flourishes in its spot. The post-Cold War 1989 is a rare example. And look at what happened to Russia. It fell back into dictatorship. So did many of the Central Asian states. So do you want to be a dictator? Do you want to be a dictator? Heck yeah, you do. You have more power than a king. Like Mussolini, do you remember who the king of Italy was? Nope, because Mussolini actually just pushed the king aside. The king put Mussolini in charge. Didn't matter. Mussolini just put him and pushed him aside. The dictator has more power than a king. You can kill people, make all the decisions. You can be awesome. You can be at Nuremberg having 100,000 people cheer you. History will remember you. Possibly well. Like, think about the dictators of the 20th century. You know a whole lot of them. You can think of, there's right off the top, there's Mao, there's Hitler, there's Stalin, right? There's Pol Pot. There's Pinochet in Chile. There's the Shah of Iran, but he's kind of a king. Who else? There's the three. There's Nasser and Sadat in Egypt, and he's recently. Well, he's not recently dead. He's dead a couple years, but he has the third military dictator in Egypt. There's the current military leader, Sisi, in Egypt. So there's four. Suharto in Indonesia. These are all just barely off the top of my head. I didn't even bring up Evita's husband because I've forgotten. It starts with a P, but I've forgotten his name. But you could think of them. You know them. Heck, think of the best presidents of the United States. FDR, Lincoln. Those are the ones who are accused of being dictators. FDR was president for was elected to 4 terms. He was president for 3. He was president 10 years? Because he dies in April of his fourth term, right? Lincoln was accused of being a dictator, of wanting to be king. The way he suspended habeas corpus, He freed the enslaved people of the South, which we view as morally good, but that was people's property. That was legally in the Constitution, people's property. And he just said, it's not your property anymore. Poof. Like, that's a dictatorial decision. It's the right one for history. But if you don't like Lincoln, there's your dictatorship. So history will remember you. Possibly will. Look at the Romans, Cincinnatus and Octavian. Caesar. So you can be remembered well if you're a good dictator. Or, heck no, you don't want to be a dictator. Why? You have people, groups, nations that are out to get you. And if you mess up even a little, or if anything changes underneath your feet, everything could collapse. And every bad thing you did for the quote-unquote greater good makes other people very, very mad. Gaddafi, Hussein, Ceausescu in Romania. I mean, they took him and his wife and just laying them up against some wall and just shot him. Gaddafi, the same thing. They captured him in a sewage drain, took him out, shot him. Saddam Hussein, they gave a trial to, but let's be honest, he was never going to be found innocent. And then they hung him. Thomas Cromwell, head cut off. Robespierre, head cut off. I think we actually go through a whole list. Caesar, executed by his senatorial quote-unquote allies. Thomas Cromwell, executed by his royal ally, the king. Oliver Cromwell died of natural causes. Napoleon died of natural causes, possibly poisoned, but he died in defeat in exile in one of the most remote places on earth. So they didn't execute him, but they could have. Mao, natural causes, but he was kind of pushed aside and came roaring back with his Cultural Revolution. Franco, natural causes. Pol Pot, natural causes, but he was overthrown by a Vietnamese invasion. Ceausescu, which I know I'm pronouncing wrong, but executed with his wife, just shot. Mussolini, executed and strung up to be, his body was strung up to be seen and beaten and spit upon. Hitler, suicide. Stalin, natural causes. Quisling, the Norwegian ally to the Nazis. So when the Nazis invaded Norway, this guy, Quisling, joined them to become the leader of Norway. He got executed. And in fact, Quisling became a European word for a collaborator. Saddam Hussein, executed. Gaddafi, executed. Pinochet, natural causes, but before his trial, and he was going to be executed. He was on trial for crimes against humanity. But that said, 60% of the time, dictators die in office. Since 1945. The 32% died violently or were executed after a trial. So you have a good chance of dying of natural causes while in office. You have a small chance of giving up power and staying alive. That's the 8%. They retire, they give up power, and the country moves on without them. But 32% die violently. So, that's like rolling a 6-sided dice and doing what? Getting a 1 or 2? That's a third? Getting a little more? Are you sure? Are you sure you want to roll those dice? So, dictators are the solution to a problem. And then they, in many cases, become the problem. And the good ones know when to leave, like an actor. They know when to leave the stage. They know when to step down. They solve the problem, and thank you very much for the power, and I'm going to go now. But it's hard. Once you have that much power and prestige and wealth and the ability to tell people what to do and have it done, a lot of people don't give it up, which is why we celebrate Washington, why we celebrate Cincinnatus, the people who do give up power. Because most people don't. Kings are like forbidden from giving up power. That's their whole thing. They have to do it till they die. And so, like, of the Roman emperors, only Diocletian, I think, retires. In 500 years, 400 years of emperors, only Diocletian retires, steps down, and is happy to have done so. He, becomes a farmer with a garden. But how many Roman emperors are murdered or overthrown or killed or blinded? Once we get to the Byzantines, if you include the Byzantines, there's a lot who are blinded, castrated. Like, bad things happen to you if you stay in power too long and you don't really want to give it up. If you're lucky, you die peacefully in your sleep. But, are you remembered well? I don't know. So thank you for taking your time. Thank you for being part of this. Be safe. Don't be a dictator. And I'll talk to you soon.